Tom, an alcoholic, and a member of the Primary Purpose Group in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and I am delighted to be here. My topic is unity. If you want to have unity, kill a pig. And that'd pull people together like nothing else in the world. Travis was thanking Robert. I thought he said for shooting the pig. So, and I never see anybody applaud for shooting a pig. And then Craig straightened me out that if it's a chopping him, somebody else did the shooting for no applause. So thanks for the barbecue. That was just outstanding stuff. I got a good buddy here. You can tell he's from California. Craig, Kent, stand up just a minute. Now look him over good. You could tell by the way he's dressed that he ain't from around here. You know, you could tell that. Kent is from Concord, California. And he agreed to come up here today and then report back to the folk in Wilmington about how well we behaved. And he's my good buddy. And he's wearing an Alaskan jacket, so you know that California must be different than here. And I appreciate him being here. I also appreciate being here with my buddies. This is our 10th reunion, I guess. And Dave, Wade, and I were talking about that we would plan to meet again here in 10 years. The only problem was at our age we probably wouldn't know each other. You know? Just say, now who are you now? So we'll optimistically look for that. I also want to thank you for the Unity Day. I think that's just absolutely outstanding. And the work that went into this. I didn't even know who everybody was did the work, but thanks for doing it. And thanks for taking time to put some attention to some important areas of service. And that's just great to see. And it's great to see this. I know the pig might have given some excuse, but I mean, you guys have already eaten and you're still here. So there's got to be a little something deeper than just pig here. And I'm just honored to be in a setting like this. I'll get organized here in a minute. I got to find my memory. We are also I was noticing some commonalities with the three of us who are back here for our decades observance. We're all three in our 40s. I was 48 years last month. And Dave, as he was nice enough to tell you, is very junior to me. He's 7 months back, and I don't ever let him forget it, and I ain't going to. I'm keeping that boy green. And I'm junior to Wade a little bit. So it's unusual to have three guys doing this kind of a program that are in their late 40s in the program. And I'm just glad to be one of them. That's an absolute... Thank you. I'll join you. And so I do appreciate that very, very much. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to have to get out of this coat. My wife told me to be sure and wear it, and I did. Y'all tell her. Is he trustworthy? Man, I got a lot of important stuff in that coat. It's warm in Johnston County. Kent took his coat off. I can't believe it. That's historic. Now, what I want to talk about for the next 90 minutes or so is. Now I got to quit because they'll be introducing me in Wilmington here in just a little while. I'll try to cover a whole bunch of stuff and do it in a little bit of a rush and hurry. I want to talk about unity and maybe push it more than just the obvious a little bit with the enormous importance of unity in our lives, in our recovery, and in the growth and success of our fellowship. I want to read to you just a little something here to remind me and all of us really about what is it that brings us together in unity. You know, what is it that pulls us here, keeps us here, makes us grateful to be here. And in the first part of chapter 2, there's a solution. It says this, and it's true of us here today. We're average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds, and that's us. We are people who normally would not mix, except me and Pappy. Now, me and Pappy would have drunk together if he'd have bought. We normally wouldn't mix. But there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We're like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy is right up here. Our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. Coming back from a common peril. You and I are folks who have looked death bang in the eye and come back. You and I are folks who have known bondage such as few people do. Thanks for mentioning freedom from bondage. That's what that conference is about. And I know where that Holiday Inn is. If you don't know, you ask me. I'll tell you right where that is. Great conference. We've known bondage. We're people who've been blind and see again. So we are rescued from a common peril. And that's part of the cement that binds us. But listen to this part. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. We don't celebrate a common problem. We celebrate a common solution. And so just talking about the agonies of the past won't do it. It's a good place to meet, but it doesn't make us stay. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And that is what binds us together. And that's what the criticality of unity is, that we're united in a purpose and to a person. Every one of us here can rally around that simple little reminder. I want to give you I'm a great example guy. Yeah, I can always understand a lot better. I'm going to lose weight just going back and forth to that table. I'm a great believer in the value of examples because it just cuts through and it makes points better than I could if I talked all day. Bless your heart, Kathy. Hey. I'm glad Mike didn't bring it. I like example. Let me mention one. Yeah, Dave disclosed my whole card there. He said that I might have spent a little bit of time in seclusion. And that's a nicer way to put it than he did. But it said the same thing. When I first came back to North Carolina, I was an exuberant young member. I'd had 3.5 years sobriety, and I was gung-ho. I mean, you think you've seen gung-ho? You ain't seen no gung-ho. Man, I hit the ground running like a young goat. Wasn't sure where I was going, but I was making good time. Man, I was boogieing somewhere. And I mean, just attacking life. Yeah, I'd been freed, and I was absolutely up and at 'em big time. I was on that state committee Dave was talking about in 1960. And so I was just having a heck of a time. Well, I was in a town, Gastonia, that had this good days and bad days as far as AA was concerned. On any given day, there may or may not be somebody sober. There was one old guy there that, he's probably my age, but he was pretty well getting over the brink. And he was the only sign of life there with any steadiness. And I thought, man alive. The first meeting I went to was, honest to God, the worst meeting I'd ever been to in my life. And I thought, good God, man, if we'd have had a meeting that bad in jail, somebody would have got hurt. Hey, no way we'd put up with that kind of junk. And so I debated. I was only 20-some miles from Charlotte. I said, heck, man, I'm going to go to the big city and get the bright lights and get out of this junk. And then a disturbing thought occurred to me. I'm the second oldest guy in that town and the only other standing troop. And the disturbing thought was, when do you become responsible? When do you take a stand? When do you take your share of responsibility? Well, it's pretty hard to evade that question. And so I decided to stay. And it was probably one of the wisest decisions I ever made in my life, because I started to really become one of the people who sort of held the place till this thing came together. And that was a wonderful, wonderful experience, wonderful growing experience. And in the course of it, I was involved about everything you could possibly think. I could tell you 1,000 stories of those thrilling days of yesteryear. Anybody that's yearning for the good old days either wasn't there or has a very poor memory, because ain't nothing good about getting puked on at 3 o'clock in the morning by some drunk. That you have all that you want to, but no thanks. Glad I was there. Glad I survived. I hope we don't go back. I got a little notion one time leading up to Unity. I got a little notion, and this was back when I had far more enthusiasm than sense. And I'm still that way somewhat. But I was absolutely on fire, and I was trying to think of some way to make AA come alive in that town. And I didn't know what a public meeting was. Probably most people here don't know what one is. We haven't done those things for a lot of years. But they used to be a fairly common occurrence. I'd never seen one, but I had read somewhere about a public meeting. That just made sense to me. That what you do is capture a good chunk of the public, bring them in, and tell them all about, how to sober up drunks. And well, that made eminent sense. Now, I'm just out of jail. I'm making just a little bit more money than I made locked up. I mean, I'm poor. You're talking poor. I was really bad shape. Well, I decided, now I'm going to use the word I hope you don't miss that. Because I decided, well, there wasn't nobody else to vote, so I decided to put on the public meeting. So I started sending out notices, calling people, got hold of folks around, and man, you talk about a turnout. We were serving barbecue, and we wound up with about 700 people in the sanctuary of the biggest church in town. I had it catered. A catered dinner. I couldn't have bought a hot dog, but I had it catered anyway. Well, I knew, any sensible human would know that you can look at how much it costs to shoot that pig. Anybody can figure that out. What it costs to cook it, put all this stuff. Anybody could calculate that, couldn't they? And could count the house and see how many people are here, and then just simple math will tell you what my share ought to be. Isn't that logical? If you think that's logical, just try it sometime. We sent out the buckets, big buckets, to collect all the money. $47. God knows. I thought, man, I'm going back to jail for doing God's work. And the amazing thing, just like that shipwreck, it's amazing how we respond to calamity. If you said to this group, we need some more money for something, nothing would happen. Nothing would happen. But if you come up with a specific problem and say, we need some money and here's what we need to do, we contribute like nobody you have ever seen. But you got to get down to cases. It's got to be addressing a real problem. And so I'm sitting there panicky with a huge, huge bill. And the word got out around the area. Say, well, the old boy's pretty dumb, but he means well. And my AA buddies around in the area stepped up to the plate and bailed the old boy out. That has been the last I-driven activity I have ever put on. I learned something about unity. I learned something about pulling together and taking this responsibility together. Huge, huge, important lesson. Big lesson for me. I was down in Louisiana a while back. And normally, kind of like Dave was saying, they'll give you a barbecue dinner. And then normally they pay you transportation down there and for your hotel, whatever you do. I mean, just in the spirit of self-support. I mean, I can't sponsor conferences. They put in the money and bring somebody in, talks long, they bring them in. So I went down and hung out for a good while. The boy that was the treasurer is a fellow named Walt, had a big beard, and probably one of the most knowledgeable big book guys I've ever seen. We had some good time just sitting in a room talking big book stuff. And we finished up the conference, and I went back home. And the guy with the beard was gone, and the lady gave me a check. And I got home, and for some reason I didn't cash it. I didn't put it in the bank. And she called me about a week later. She said, "Have you cashed that check?" I said, "No." She said, "Don't." I said, "Oh, what's the problem?" Well, Walt, the guy with the beard and the big book knowledge, also was the guy with all the money. He left with every cent. Didn't pay the hotel. Didn't pay any expenses. You know, I mean, you talk about calamity and hitting town. And I said, "Well, don't worry about it. Shoot, if you need something, let me know. And I'll be glad to pitch in some." And she said, No, we're going to take care of it, but just hang on for a little while. About 3 weeks later, got a call, said, "Cashed a check." I said, "Tell me what happened." And she said she described the deal. She said the first night they met, you know, the leaders, the ones that took the responsibility. First night they met, the topic of the meeting was how long the rope ought to be to hang old Walt. You know, they were trying to figure out, you know, how much he ought to swing. And they got through demonizing Walt. And finally, there's an old boy, if you ever get down, he lives in Golden Meadows, Louisiana, named Joe. Wonderful fellow. Full Cajun boy. And Joe said, he was 21 years sober at the time. He said, "You know, we don't really need to do anything about old Walt." He said, "If this thing works out like I think, we'll be over it very shortly. Old Walt never will unless he makes it right." And what happened there was exactly what happened in my little public meeting. The folk around there pitched in, bailed out, paid everything, 100%. And I saw Joe later, and he told me that had been the finest thing for unity in that area in his memory. Because there's something about getting that crisis and then coming together with the solution that has a powerful, powerful kind of a thing. And so that's why I always like to keep pretty clear that we're not just some good time social club, that we're folk who really have come back, who aren't supposed to be here for the most part, but by the amazing grace of God, we found this solution, and we'll unbelievably dig in to make it work, to make that thing go. And I got about 100 more stories that I'll forego. Oh, got my chair. Got you. Kathy will come unkiss me if I don't use that thing. There are just 2 or 3 things I just want to visit just a little bit in this whole business of unity. You know, in those examples, I think you kind of see what a galvanizing kind of an experience it is for this kind of stuff to happen. And underneath it all, that's what this whole business is about how we hang together and why it's important for us to hang together. Yeah, our first tradition is the thing that talks about unity. A lot of our traditions do. But our common welfare has got to come first. My recovery depends on unity of this group, unity of this program. And what that means to me is that if it isn't good for all of us, it ain't good for me. That I have to recognize that the wellness of this program is what I depend on for my life. And so when I start doing things in a narrow, selfish vein and fail to account for the common welfare so that it is good for the folk that I share with in my group, or in this case, in my district. Your District 50 is coming together in unity today. And if it isn't good for all of us, it isn't good for any of us. And so common welfare is a tremendously, tremendously important thing. You know, it's funny about a strange thing when you get to be one of the older members around. I'm the oldest guy around in my area, and I'm also probably the most active guy around in my area. And that's a double-edged sword when you're that way. Because in one way it's kind of nice to see an old-timer fired up, but in another way it's a kind of a tough thing to deal with. Because how do you deal with somebody? It's kind of hard. I mean, everybody knows it rationally, but it's just kind of hard to go up against a guy that's been sober longer than you've been alive. And so it has its downside too. It's like sleeping with a 500-pound gorilla. So it's hard to deal with sometimes. And we had a thing happen in my group. Now Mitchell's going to be speaking down there for long. Yeah, don't you tell this, Mitchell. Don't send the tapes down there. I had a thing happen. Now, my home group's important to me. That is important. That's as important to me as my fingerprints. That's who I am. That's where I do my work. That's where I belong. That's where I really sink roots. So that's important to me. That's not just a nice place to visit. And I think a home group has got to be, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I think a home group has to be a good, solid place that delivers on the things that are important to me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I'm pretty stringent about what I try to find in a home group or producing a home group. And we've got a pretty good group. We're a strong service group. And a while back, we normally meet in a variety of meetings. We'll meet in a big gaggle of folk, and then we'll break up into on our Monday night meetings. We'll break up into three groups. One's a newcomer group for folk under a year. One's a big book meeting, and the other one is a topic discussion out of the literature. And they're all nice meetings. And it makes a fairly well-rounded agenda. Well, one week I was out of town when there was a business meeting. And while I was out of town on that business meeting, what was to me a very important decision was made to cut back and take out the big book meeting. Well, now I took that more than a little personal, because that's my group is being reduced to a newcomer meeting and a topic discussion, and I don't think that's enough to get well on. And so I was a little hot. That's one way to put it. I was burned is what I was. But I'm also accountable to a group. And if I'm not at the business meeting, whatever we voted in, we voted in. My absence was my vote. And I'm smart enough to understand that. And so I was hot enough to go to war. But I was smart enough to know that that would be stupid and injurious and totally inappropriate. And so I said, well, I'll just wait a while till I cool down. And I can speak reasonably without anger. And a month later, came to a business meeting. I wasn't cool enough. And so I sat through the business meeting, and I'm just chomping at the bit to say something, but I ain't going to do it. And so I waited another month. That was hard for me to do. That was hard. But I prayed about it. I put my thoughts out. I wanted to be absolutely sure that I wasn't just angry because they did something without the great leader being involved. I wanted to be sure that that wasn't what it was about. That I, honest to God, had a difference with that decision. And so when I got through evaluating that, I was 100% sure that that was exactly the way I felt. And so the second month, now I'm 2 months from the flash point. And 2 months later, had the business meeting. It became a little bit of a lull. And I said, guys, I want to bring up something. And I'm not going to make a motion, but a couple of months ago, we made a decision to make a change in this group to fix something that I don't think was broken. And I believe we made a mistake. So I'm going to ask you to reinstate that effective tonight. Well, interesting kind of reaction. Silence. One guy asked one question, and then the group overwhelmingly said, let's go back. Yeah. Now, suppose I'd have gone at that the other way. Suppose I'd have gone with that with rancor and anger and saying, how could you do that? Wouldn't have gotten anywhere. The common welfare, that was something that I have to recognize that my responsibility is to be another member of that group, period. And to act in concert with that group and not try to push them around just because I've been here for a while. Very important thing for me to put to practice what I believe. That the common welfare does come first. And the unity of that group is more important than just my point of view. It so happened that they agreed with it. And I think it was a good decision. It was a sound decision. And I'm really happy with it. So is everybody else. And things are working okay. But sometimes those kind of things, when we start looking at unity, there are things where I have to give a little. I have to not just push my way around and all this kind of stuff and try to sway people to my point of view. But let other people find their way. And then if I'm making sense, they'll agree. If I'm not, they won't. Yeah. And so unity, tremendously important thing. I mentioned one other thing that's on unity that I think is an important thing. Is one of our traditions that I just visit for just a little bit. One of the things that many of us have concerns about has been some of the changes that have occurred in AA, and particularly in regard to our third tradition, that the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. That's a very simple sounding thing if you just read that short form of the tradition. Anybody got the long form handy? I've got it if I could find it. I've got a big book. When you look at the third tradition in the long form, it reads a lot different. In the short form, what it says is the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. Pure and simple, eh? Listen to the long form. Our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover. Nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. Puts a whole different kind of a tone to that tradition. And it's a pretty important kind of a recognition, I believe. There's in this country, all around here, and I travel all over the place, and I rarely go anywhere that this is not a real live issue. And it's an issue that causes a lot of divisiveness and that really jeopardizes unity in many areas. And it's one that we haven't dealt with very well. Some places, I know places in this country that have just given up any pretense of singleness of purpose. And you say, well, it just doesn't matter. It isn't worth the fight. Well, that's something that I think we need to grapple with, is whether it's worth the fight. I'll tell you what influences me and why I feel like I do. One night I was over to prison where I served as an outside sponsor. I was over one night and they started to have an election and nominated a fellow. It was an open meeting, but they nominated a fellow to be the chairman who was not an alcoholic. He was a drug addict. That's all he ever identified himself as. And he was a nice guy, a really nice fellow. And so he identified himself, and the group started voting. And I said, whoa, wait a minute, guys. I said, you got to remember that AA meetings are conducted by AA members. And AA members are alcoholic. So you can't do that. And I told Mac, I said, Mac, you understand that, don't you? And I didn't want to embarrass him because he's a nice man. And he said, no, I understand. Okay, fine. And so he sat down. And then at the end of the meeting, the chairman had a few minutes left, and he said, Tom, would you talk a little bit more about that thing? Because a lot of guys are confused on that. A lot of guys are mixed up on it. He said, would you explain just a little bit more what you're talking about? And you know how sometimes you reach in and you get something you hadn't even thought about that much? That you just intuitively kind of come up with what you really feel about something. And I never had done this before, but I said, well, I tell you what it comes down to me, is that everybody here remembers the history, and all of us certainly do. All of us know the story of Bill and Bob and how the decrepit stockbroker carried the message about a fatal illness to the physician, and the physician said, at last, somebody understands. Somebody understands. Remember that? Very pivotal thing in our history. Because what happened there, that formed the basic tenet of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the basic tenet from which this fellowship grew. That tenet being that when one alcoholic opens up and shares honestly with another, it has a power beyond estimate of earning the trust and confidence of that other alcoholic. And it gives hope where there's none. And so I went over that and I said, now that tenet is either true or it's not. It's either true or it's not. If it is true, then you and I who have come since have an absolute responsibility to assure that that environment exists for the next alcoholic who walks in this room. I don't have the right to modify this program to accommodate my peculiarities. If that tenet is right. If that tenet isn't right, then it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We can just have Hootenanny Anonymous or whatever you want to call it. But anything could go if you do that. So that's what I come down to, is that I believe that tenet. I, honest to God, believe that tenet. That there is something special that happens when I talk with another alcoholic. I immediately feel connected, comfortable, trustworthy. Tremendously important. And so the thing is, we get hung up on trying to solve it at the level of the door. We want to solve it by monitoring the door of who comes in. I think it's a far more fundamental issue than that. The fundamental issue is, do we indeed need to provide an environment where an alcoholic can walk in and find trust and hope and confidence from other alcoholics? And if so, then that is our challenge. That's our responsibility. My personal belief is, I'll just say one more thing about that, but my personal belief is that any person, as far as I'm concerned, this is the last stop on the bus line. Alcoholics Anonymous is the jumping off place. This is where you go when there ain't a place else to go. And for that reason, I believe any person who walks into this meeting, any meeting, ought to receive, at a minimum, a warm welcome and then loving guidance to where they need to go. What they don't need is some sort of an abrasive confrontation or embarrassment. So at a minimum, at Alcoholics Anonymous, somebody ought to get at least that. But does that mean to compromise? No, it doesn't. It means to deal with it in an appropriate kind of a way. Just simply put your arm around a guy and say, hey, come on, let's go talk a minute. Explain what the drill is. Very important. Very important thing when you talk about unity. It's easy to unify around a pig. But when you get to the point where you're unifying around a principle, that's enormously important for you and I to deal with. Every one of us has to deal with that individually, about where our beliefs are. So it's a real challenge to anonymity, to this whole business of unity. I mentioned one other one that, in regard to this, what is it that produces the unity? It's our fifth tradition, where it says each group has but one primary purpose. Every group has one primary purpose, and that's to carry its message to the alcoholic still suffers. The only reason we exist is to carry our message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And to me, that's a tremendously important thing. It follows up on that third tradition, but it tells what our business is, so that we don't get off into a lot of nice activities that may sound enticing, but we stick to our purpose. We do one thing, if that tenet's right. We do one thing better than anybody else in this world, and that's to reach the alcoholic who is sinking and about to give up hope. That's the one thing we do better than anybody in this world. Doesn't make us expert on anything else. Sometimes we forget it, but it really doesn't. It doesn't make me a great marriage counselor, lawyer, any of that kind of thing. I'll just throw in one thing about that has been pretty important to me as an individual and also in a group. It's to recognize my limitations. It really follows that, to recognize my limitations. To realize that what I have to offer, the most important thing I'll ever offer anybody is where I was broken inside and where God healed me. That's the most important thing I will ever offer anybody. Now, I may learn a few things along the way, but that's important for me. And when I'm working with somebody, one of the things that I had to learn was to recognize when I reached my limits, to recognize when I was getting into deeper water than I was prepared to handle, and to know when to say, I'm sorry, but this has got a little above my job description, and make an outside referral. Don't hesitate to do it one bit. And that's in keeping with that thing of recognizing the purpose. And the unity is in the clarity with what we do, the clarity of what we do. And I'll tell you one other thing about my group, and then I'll mention a little bit of other grunting and groaning stuff, and then we'll polish off the pig. I was sitting in my home group a while back. Oh, well, it wasn't a while back. It was Christmas before last. And it was normally we meet right around Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. And so one night we were sitting there and we were having our usual kind of we don't get a speaker. We just sort of sit around, love each other, and just share with each other a little bit. Call up somebody and they'll talk a little. Normally we try to focus that on newcomers. But they called on me, and it was kind of surprising because we don't normally get the old goats awake that time of night. But they called me, and I got up, and I had been thinking while I was sitting in that meeting, just privately I was thinking, why do I appreciate my group so much? Why am I so grateful to this group? Why does it feel like the place I belong on this planet? And I was thinking about why. And it's not because we're nice people or special people or real folksy or personable people. The reason I felt that way was because of what we do. It's what we do. Not what we think or say or how witty or all that kind of junk. It's because of what we do. Because what we do in our group is actively carry this message to anybody who'll sit still long enough to get it. We do a bunch of stuff in prisons. We do a bunch of stuff in detoxes and rehabs and PI and CPC. We do a lot of stuff. If it's got to do with carrying a message. And that's what makes me feel good. Because that's what the purpose is. As long as I've been in AA, I don't know that I have ever seen a fight about the primary purpose. About carrying out that primary purpose. Because the closer we get to our fundamental primary purpose, the more tightly unified we are. And you rarely hear disagreement about it. And that's why I think that tradition is so important in thinking about unity. Father, I tell you what I want to... Now, I'm an enthusiastic member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I go out of here, I'm going to go one day, but when I do... If I get my druthers, I want to go out of here going full speed. I want to go out of here wide open. I hope to God I don't get into just sort of taking my pulse every 15 minutes. And I want to be wide open. And so I'm enthused about Alcoholics Anonymous. But I'm not the village idiot either. I have a lot of concerns. You've heard some of them here. I have some concerns about our fellowship. And as a responsible member, I want to do something about those things the best I can, whatever I can contribute. And one thing struck, I seemed like when Dave was talking about the last assembly that I went to, the last assembly. If you've been, you know what I'm talking about. We do an awful lot of stuff. And we report a lot of data. We report a lot of numbers on the indicators of what's happening in AA around the world. The thing that startled me that night was every number that was reported was down. Down. Been a lot of years since we've had universal down in Alcoholics Anonymous. We've been in a growth period for the last generation. But every number that was given, I'm talking about number of groups, number of institutional groups, contributions, membership estimates, every single number was down. And I don't think that's an accounting error. I think that's a very real reflection. And it's part of what just sort of gets my attention to some things. I'll tell you, and in my mind this relates to unity. I hope it does in yours. Among all the things that I have concerns about in AA, of all the things, and I've got a lot of them, but my number one concern is the amazing growth, proliferation of what I call just kind of lightweight meetings. Lightweight meetings. Casual gatherings that just sort of fit the schedule of some people or whatever, but they'll tend to be lightweight, as opposed to well-ordered, purposeful, structured groups. And if you look across that, it's a wide continuum. If you were going to put it on a chart, it would be a very wide continuum. On one extreme, you would find, like in my little county, we got almost as many AA groups as citizens. We got groups everywhere. And we got, it was 30-something meetings the last I knew. And man, I live in rinky-dink Mayberry, North Carolina. 30-some meetings. I've had the feeling, it's not going to happen, but I've had the feeling, if somebody just rang the town bell and said, everybody report to your home group, I think we'd have about 15 empty meeting places. Because what we got, a lot of people just kind of lead a nomadic existence, just sort of wandering from one place to another. Well, when you think about the weight of responsibility of dealing with things that Dave particularly, and talking about the service, you start thinking about dealing with things like that. Where does that leadership come from? Where do we grow leaders? Where do we develop people to take the responsibilities for making decisions and moving in and taking responsibility? I'll assure you, they don't come out of chat rooms. They don't come out of little coffee clutches. They come out of purposeful groups where you learn to take responsibility and start to take your place in this world. And so that's my biggest concern is those things. There's nobody, Tom, I, or nobody else. Nobody can put a stamp on one and say this one ain't and this one is. Nobody can do that. You heard that little thing I read in the long form of the traditions. This has got to be the most generous fellowship in the world in terms of saying who can be a member or who can be a group. You're a member if you say you are. It doesn't require any approval from anybody. And you're a group if you say you're a group. If you're two or more alcoholics gathered together for the purpose of recovery and have no other affiliation, you call yourself a group. Doesn't matter what your purpose is. You can meet to crusade against the General Service Conference. You can do that if you want to. You have that latitude. So it's totally free. So nobody can say this one is and this one ain't. Yeah. But now, naturally, we're going to have our druthers about where we fall in the spectrum. And on the one extreme, you'll find some that meet only for the purpose of the meeting. That's all it is. It's a group of people who will pick a time and just sort of meet. Very often has limited or even no leadership. None. There'll be a group of people who don't say, hey, you lead today. Yeah, I led yesterday. You lead today. Yeah, and that'll be it. Yeah. There's nothing that precedes the meeting nor follows the meeting. It's just a sort of an experience where somebody comes together, spend a little time together, then get on with business. Well, that's a pretty lightweight thing, in terms of of a meeting, and you think about what's going to come out of that. You know, what's that going to produce in the way of leadership? What's that going to do? You can't even have a group conscience in that. It'd be like having a group conscience in an airport or something. You know, you can't do it. And so you got that extreme. Now, those are very, very seductive things. They're very attractive, particularly for somebody that's not grounded in the program yet, because it's almost a no-brainer. I mean, God, there's no responsibility. All you do is walk in, get what you want, drink coffee, walk out. Couldn't get a much lighter investment, could you? On the other end, you'll find now mine is on the other end of that, so you don't need to tell you where my bias is. You know where it is. Mine is in real, solid, purposeful groups. And I think a group is an enormously important place. I think it really is what it says in literature. It's the basic building block of our service structure. It's the basic building block of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so what concerns me is the unbelievable growth of those sort of casual, lightweight things, because they're handy and convenient and no stress or strain, as opposed to the ones on the heavier end of the scale. And so we've got a decrease in those and an exponential explosion in the other. Now, why would that concern me? Well, I've already enumerated a number of things. Let me give you one other example of why that's bothersome me. Those things come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them you would be hard-pressed if you went in there to even identify that you're in an AA meeting. Be hard-pressed. I was in a town up west a while back. I was participating in a community. I was doing a professional thing, and I did my presentation. But the next panel behind me was from the local mental health deal, and they were going to be talking about alcohol and drug problems. So I had more than a little passing interest in that. So I said, I'm going to stay for that. So I stayed and listened. And they did their deal, and the last speaker was a psychiatrist. And I swear to God, he was the most tired, defeated-looking man I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he just looked like he was exhausted when he went up to the mic. And so he told who he was and where he worked over there. And he started telling just a little bit, I mean, with no pep in that boy. And he said, I'll tell you what my biggest concern is as a psychiatrist in this setting. Well, my biggest concern, it's the alcoholic who has a second diagnosis. You know what I'm talking about. Somebody with a dual diagnosis. You've got alcoholism and some other complicating deal. And he said, logically, hear what I'm saying now. He said, logically, I know that AA is the place to send them. He said, but for the life of me, I don't understand why a lot of them come back worse than they were before they went. And he said, I am at a loss for this and don't understand it. Can anybody help? Well, I just got through presenting on something different, and I'm not from that town. I wanted somebody local to speak up and say something. And there were some AA folk in there, people that I recognized. And so I'm kind of pushing and saying, somebody speak up for God's sake. Well, I mean, the guy deserved an answer. And so finally I stuck my hand up. And I said, well, I just made a presentation. I said, but let me just tell you, I'm a long-term member of AA, and I understand what you're talking about. And what I told him, I wish I didn't have to say that. But I said, one thing, and I believe you want to help, but one thing you have to recognize is that everything that flies the flag is not the same thing. Because you are going to find an unbelievable plethora of things that fly the flag. And I said, in all honesty, there's some meetings I don't go to because I come out worse. I come out feeling like I need a meeting or a bath or something. And I said, unfortunately, that's a reality. And I said, I tell you what I would recommend. And I wish this weren't necessary. But in my mind, yours it may not be. But in my mind, it was necessary to say this. He hadn't got time to go out and do an evaluation on every AA group. It's not his business. I said, if my recommendation to you would be to get to know 2 or 3 members that you trust, and then call them. Tell them what you got. And they can tell, obviously you've got a guy that's borderline paranoid freak out. You're not going to put him into a confrontational setting, where people are going to be tense and anxious. You're going to put him into a different deal. And so a simple little thing like that. And he really appreciated the information. Now, it was saddening to me to have to say that. To not be able to say, well, just pick up the phone, or you just get you a directory and you can send him anywhere that's listed on there. Now, if you're dealing with a delicate case, brother, I tell you, that's high risk. High risk. And so that's part, when you get this kind of evolution, development in the program, it's troubling when you start getting that kind of environment. And so I think there are things that cause concern. Now, what do we do about it? There's a whole bunch of stuff you can. Let me tell you one last thing that I've been thinking about. Now, I'm a service guy. Yeah. I'm heavily involved right now in trying to get our services energized around the state, and so I'm up to my ears in that kind of stuff, and I plan to stay there because I really want the alcoholic who still suffers to have a good shot at a thing called AA. And so I want to do everything I can. I'll tell you something I've thought about. I'll just throw this out. I've never suggested it to anybody publicly yet. And I'm not even ready to do it anywhere else. But now what do you do? So here you are, you're sitting in 4 Oaks, or you're sitting in Smithfield or Kinley or somewhere. What do you do about stuff like this? Is that something beyond reach? Is it something that you can realistically do? I tell you what I've thought about as just one member. I'd like to see us do something at the area level, at the state level, that would be the development of kind of a resource capability. So that in things like if you had a place in the state where they were just hopelessly lost and didn't know quite how to get a good solid group together, I'd like to see us set it up so that you could make a call to somebody, kind of like to the CFC coordinator, but I'd like to see us have an identification in the area structure so that if you were struggling with trying to get a group going, you could call, and whoever that coordinator would be would put together a little team of people to go and help get it done. No cost, just as a service. You pay a little bit of whatever you do, we pay for their mileage or whatever. But I'd love to see something like that done on things that would strengthen a group. And I just took a look at a few things that we could, if we did something like it, we could offer like workshops, seminars, any kind of place where we wanted to pull people together at local level. If a local group wanted us to do something that would strengthen and develop a good, healthy program in a particular area. Identify people, like, we may get you 3 guys to go and just do something on a particular thing, on developing a good, strong, purposeful group. Have literature and materials available so you didn't have to hunt through and find it. You could call somebody and say, here's what we need. Somebody in our state could respond to that. We could handle it through the existing structure. All we'd have to do is just designate a person, phone number, here's where you call. Get help anywhere in the state. I know, and you gather from what I said, I know what it's like to be wandering in the woods by yourself trying to figure out how to get something going. And, man, I'm telling you one thing, if I'd have known anywhere to call, I'd have called, man, because people would drive me nuts. And I was nutty enough anyway. So a huge resource could be available in something like that. Well, just a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to do something in sponsorship, in service, in how to do any kind of stuff you want to do in that, I'd love to see us develop a kind of a resource capability in our area. Lots and lots of stuff that can be done, and I just mentioned that as one. I'm going to be playing around with that some, and I hope you'll give some thought to that. because you've got lots of people all over the state that are struggling, trying to get something going, and hanging on by the skin of their teeth. And so if you get ideas like that, communicate it through your DCM, and we'll get that thing going up through the structure so we get a resource. What I want to do is see our area become a vibrant resource and tool for carrying this message at the local level. And so I think we could do something with that real good. Well, anyway, it is great to see you folk, and I hope that you take what's happening here in this unity and kind of like Wade said, take it back, and share it liberally and every chance you get, and have a ball doing this thing, man. I tell you, it can be a hoot. I thank you very much. Thanks.